Sir Ken, it is an honor to have this chance to talk with you. Thank you very much.
Pleasure, thank you.
I want to start with a big picture issue and then dive down into some more specific issues. One of the things you talk about a lot is the need to rethink the fundamental principles on which we base education. What do you mean by that?
Well, what I mean is that our current systems of education, if you look at them, are based on principles of industrial manufacturing. I know that sounds like an odd comment, but it's really true, because most national systems weren't invented pretty much until the mid to late 19th century. And they grew up to meet the needs of the Industrial Revolution. And if you look at how schools typically operate, I'm not talking about individual schools, but if you look at the typical pattern, it's a very linear system. Kids move by age through these different grades. There's a big emphasis on standardization. And the assumption is that schools should concentrate only on activities or subjects, as they're often called, which are directly relevant to work. So it feels in most ways like an industrial system. It's like you're manufacturing products. And all that's fine, except that kids aren't products and life isn't like that. So what I'm arguing for is a style of education which is based on the principles that really govern the way human life flourishes, not the way factories work.
You talk a lot about creativity. People think of you, they think of the notion of creativity. Talk about what you mean by creativity and maybe even relate that back to what you just said about fundamental principles of education.
Well, there are all kinds of misconceptions about creativity. I'm going to talk about them a bit later on, but if you ask adults if they are creative, they often say that they're not. And it's interesting to me why they should say that, because if you ask children if they're very creative, they'll say that they are, up to a certain age. And one of the reasons, I think, is that people associate creativity mainly with the arts. So when they say they're not creative, they really mean they're not very artsy. Now, I'm a major advocate of the arts in schools. I think it's a catastrophe that arts programs are being cut across the country. But this is a bigger argument than that, because you can be creative in science, in technology, in mathematics, and almost anything at all that involves your intelligence. And creativity is really the great driver of human achievement. It's why we're not sitting in caves anymore. It's why we're not all eating carrion out on the savannah. It's why we've moved on to golf clubs from bone clubs. And it's why we fly airplanes through the skies, because human life has been characterized by great flights of the imagination and by the development of technologies, ideas, arts practices, theories that are the fruit of human intelligence and creative thinking. So it's really fundamental to the way we think about education that we should understand what creativity is, why it matters, and how it works.
You've said, actually, that we educate creativity out of students. Would you talk about that a little bit?
Well, it happens in part because of this industrial culture of education. If you look at how creativity works in any field, whether it's music, writing poetry, architecture, in science, in technology, excuse me, developing computer programs, there's a constant process of trial and error. It's very rare that you get things right the first time. You work on it, you practice on things, you improvise, you prototype. It's a pretty messy business. It's a very disciplined business in lots of respects too. But you often make mistakes. You often have to go back to the beginning. I mean, if you look at one of the storied innovators in American life, Thomas Edison, he made hundreds of attempts to develop the light bulb before he actually came up with one. The history of innovation is full of people coming up with ideas that didn't work. I spoke to a friend of mine once who had the Nobel Prize for chemistry, and I asked him how many of his experiments failed. Now, bear in mind, he won the Nobel Prize. And he said about 90% of them probably failed. He said, actually, failure is not the right word. What you're finding out is what doesn't work. So to be creative in any field means trying things out and casting about, hypothesizing, testing. The standardization culture in schools really discourages that type of approach. It's about finding one answer. A lot of the standardized tests are based on multiple choice formats. It's a choice of 4 possible answers. There's no time for nuance. And that's got nothing to do with education. It's got a lot to do with the convenience of the testing system. So these things can be run through optical scanners, and it's a bit like, you know, stamping kids with a barcode. It doesn't encourage that type of creative thing. That's one reason. And the other reason is that you don't just get creative by getting older. It's like you don't suddenly wake up at the age of 17 and you can operate an electron microscope or you can play guitar. You have to learn how to do these things. And if we don't teach people the skills and process and techniques of being creative in schools, there's no reason why they should naturally fall upon them just because they're getting older. So we have to do it deliberately, and at the moment we're almost systematically doing the opposite.
Is this a problem in United States education, or is it something you see in other countries as well?
Oh, it's everywhere. I mean, I always say, I mean, I live in America now. I haven't just popped over here to have a quick shot at you. I mean, I'm from Europe, from England, but I live here now, and I, with others, put together a national strategy in the UK in the late 90s for the government of the day, the Labour government. And it was about promoting creativity in schools. And the reason we were asked to do it was because, for the most part, government policies were the same as they have been here. They've been discouraging it, not deliberately, but nonetheless systematically. And I said to the government of the time, if you're serious about creativity, and you should be for economic, social, personal, and every type of cultural reason, then we should do this deliberately, and we should understand what it is. I get asked to speak in all sorts of different settings and countries with school districts around the world. No, it's not a unique problem in the United States at all. It's a global issue. I think what is different here just now is that America has bought very heavily into this standardization culture. And there are all kinds of reasons why that's going on, but it's really not helping. I speak a lot to groups around the world. I speak, and in America too. I've worked with states across America. I've worked with professional associations, teachers, universities. There's a big appetite to understand how this can be done better. But I'd say that the current standardization culture is probably more acute here than in some countries.
Well, China, for example, seems to think that the United States does creativity and education well. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts about why they see that?
It's interesting, isn't it? Because the standardization movement has been turbocharged in the past few years by the international league tables that are published through the Programme for International Student Assessment, PISA, which has become a bit like an international beauty contest in education. They periodically test 15-year-olds in languages, math and science. America has been coasting along around the middle of these charts for quite a long time, despite the fact that we spend more money on education in America than almost anywhere else by head of student. China recently came out, well, Shanghai, the district of Shanghai, has come out in the top slots in the past two PISA assessments. And of course, this has sent shockwaves through some politicians and policymakers in America saying we've got to get to be more like China or like South Korea. But really, we should hesitate to do that for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the emphasis in China these days is to move away from that type of approach. A number of officials there have said, this is fine, our kids do well on these standardized tests, but they would because we drill them to do that. But that's not the point. They said, we know that we have to help our children become more creative, like they do in America, which is interesting. There's a quote is from Wayne Gretzky, who was once asked why he scored so many more goals than other people. And he said, because I always go to where the puck is going to be, not to where it is. And you do get this sense that in some policies here, we're rushing to where the puck is, while countries who are looking further ahead are rushing to where they know it's going to be. So there's good and bad in both systems, but I think it would be a big mistake to throw our hat in entirely now with the kind of techniques that have driven people to the top of these particular charts.
Could you paint us a picture of what a classroom that is incorporating creative thinking or creative expression would look like? A math class, for example, if that's possible, to think of what that would look like.
Well, yeah, I was asked a while ago about my theories, and I'm always very keen to say they're not theories. I'm not making it up. I mean, I know I look deceptively young. I live in Los Angeles. I've all kinds of work done, but I'm actually rather old now. I mean, I've been working in education for 40 years, and I've worked with schools, school districts, teachers, professional associations. I've taught in universities, and I'm simply speaking up on behalf of what educators actually know works. I've come across fantastic maths teachers. I've come across amazing language teachers, wonderful drama and dance teachers who are doing all the things I'm actually talking about. There's a school which we're featuring in a new book I'm just doing in Southern California. Many people will know it's called High Tech High. They have a very high graduation rate from that school. By the way, a lot of schools in America, sadly, have pretty low graduation rates, comparatively speaking. But this high school has a high graduation rate. Their work is very project-based. They put together math with science, technology, the humanities, with the arts. They work on practical projects. They work in teams. They work collaboratively. And they don't just sit and tell students how to approach mathematical problems. They get them to solve them because they have to apply maths practically. I was speaking recently in the UK, and I was asked if I thought dance should be taught as much in schools as math. And I said, well, of course it should. Why not? I mean, at the moment we have kids who are sitting in desks day after day after day, bored very often, some of them being medicated to get them through the day and kind of zoning out. We live in bodies. We have to be physical. The best learning is active when people are up and about and moving and doing things. We know that. We don't. When we leave school, we don't all sit round all day drumming our fingers. Well, we shouldn't anyway. There's a lot of. I was on the board of the Royal Ballet Theatre. There's a lot of math in music. There's a huge amount of math in dance. So it's seeing what these connections are and how they work together. And as I say, this isn't a theory. It's carried out in practice in good schools all the time. The problem is these approaches which work are being discouraged in the name of a system that actually doesn't work. And if the current system of standardization actually was improving graduation rates, raising standards across the country, energizing teachers, thrilling parents, motivating students, well, I'd go home and watch the television, but it isn't, and it won't, because it doesn't sit with how people actually learn.
You mentioned technology, and I had wanted to ask you about technology as being a important part of trying to make a transition into a more creative or personalized education system. Thoughts about that?
Well, technology is everywhere. Technology wasn't invented by Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, and people are getting very excited. People are getting very excited just now about iPads, and they're right to. But technology has gone hand in hand with human progress since the dawn of civilization, from the first time we lit a fire and made a flint axe to working on how we could develop bows and arrows, to the jet engine and the Mariner missions. I mean, human life, creativity, has been born along with a dynamic and creative relationship with tools. I mean, we're using tools here now. We're sitting in front of video cameras and lights. It's a toolkit. I mean, the tools themselves don't do anything. It takes good people to know how to use them. It's like a set of chisels won't make you a wonderful cabinet. You have to know how to use them. But these new tools make available all kinds of extraordinary opportunities for creative work and thinking. And interestingly, if you look at the growth, particularly of digital technologies and the internet, it isn't that all these things are being produced by kind of cold-blooded programmers sitting in white coats in neon-lit rooms. All these things have been developed in a flurry of interdisciplinary activity between artists, writers, scientists, business leaders. It's like most tools, they develop as people use them, and as people use them and find new things to do with them, they get refined. So it's a constantly reciprocal and creative process. So the new tools that we've been evolving over the past 20, 30 years have really created brand new horizons for education. There was a time when you had to go to school because that's where all the books were. Well, now everything is online, pretty much, and it changes the role of teaching. It changes how kids access information. I mean, a lot of our kids are much better at these tools than we are, who are supposed to be teaching them. It doesn't mean we have nothing to teach them, but there are some things we don't need to teach them, some things they could probably teach us. So it changes the whole equation. I think it's a fantastic opportunity now that we should be grasping to personalize education, to promote more collaborative forms, and of course, yes, to promote more creative ways of thinking.
So our audience, our constituents, are state legislators who are struggling with these issues around standards and testing and arts and how to include all of that at the state policy level. What one or two pieces of advice could you give them as they go forward, kind of struggling to find the right balance between these things in education?
Well, firstly, to recognize that there is a need for balance here, that these various aspects of the curriculum aren't in conflict. Sometimes it's seen as a choice. I mean, I've had people say to me, I had a senior politician in the UK say to me when I was developing the strategy there, we'd like to have more art and music and poetry and so on in schools, and more creative approaches to science. But we have to get students to become literate, and we have to get them to pass the math test. And I said, yes, but you don't do those things instead of or afterwards. Getting kids engaged imaginatively, stoking their curiosity, getting them to do things is how you raise standards. The best way to get kids excited about reading standards is to give them really interesting stuff to read. The best way you get them to improve their grammar and literary skills is to get them to write interesting things, and we've always known that. So that's the first thing, to see these things aren't in conflict, and we need a more sophisticated understanding of how these processes actually play out in practice. And the second is that I think it's very important for policymakers to understand there's a kind of ecosystem in education. The old industrial model was very much based on efficiencies and on sort of command and control mentalities, and we've seen that a lot since No Child Left Behind. We're going to tell you what to do. It's interesting, as you sit here, there's a big debate about the Common Core just now, and a lot of the objections to the Common Core aren't to do with the intrinsic nature of the standards themselves, some of which are really very good, I think. There's a reaction to being told what to do, as it's seen, by the federal government. So a lot of it's political, it's not educational. But nonetheless, there has been a tendency to promote command and control, like we will tell schools what to do. They're out of hand, we're going to have to just tell them what to do. The thing is, it doesn't work. If you look at alternative systems like the ones in Europe, particularly in Finland, they've had a completely different approach. They have cultivated the profession of teaching. Yes, they have standards, but they give people much more freedom to collaborate. So what I'm saying is that we need to change metaphors here. I think great education is much more like agriculture than it is like manufacturing. You think of your own family, it's about creating conditions under which people want to learn, in which they will be encouraged and stimulated and provoked. And that isn't the job of legislators to go in, unless legislators are planning to go and teach all these kids themselves, which presumably they're not. Their job is to create conditions under which schools can do that effectively and responsibly. It's like teachers can't make children learn. They can't learn for them. They have to create conditions where kids want to learn. Head teachers have to create conditions where teachers can do their job properly. And legislators have to create conditions where schools are able to carry out at a local level their real roles and responsibility, which is to energize learning, to engage the community, and to raise standards that way. The real way to improve education is not from the top down, it's from the ground up.
Excellent way to finish our discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.